Good morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock, and I welcome you to week 6 of our Cardio-ECHO weight management series. Please remember to chat your name in the box so that we could record your attendance today. I'm going to introduce the hub here. I'm Shannon Switkowski, the clinic coordinator.
Jim Warner, behaviorist and health educator.
Goutham Rao, I'm the director of the ECHO program.
I'm Ann Nevar, director of cardio at Case Western Reserve.
Jesse Lewis, program manager here at Case.
Rick Carnacione, web content producer for the cardio program.
Okay, we'll get started with Dr. Rao.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us, everyone. As a little bit of a prelude, I want to try to make this a bit more interactive than it's been in the past. And usually that takes place after a few of the ECHO sessions in a series. The reason that people aren't as interactive sometimes is not because they're shy, it's because it is a video conference series and you can't see your fellow participants. And so sometimes encouraging a little bit of participation on behalf of one or two people is a useful way to get started. So I don't mean to pick on anyone, I'll probably pick somebody at random as we go through it. Next slide, please. So these are our disclosure statements. They include Adam and Chris, and Saran, I don't believe, is here with us this morning. And you can read those as you wish. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about goal setting and incremental behavior change. And of course, this is an important step. We've talked about opening the door, motivational interviewing, etc. And the key lesson here is if you don't have something to offer once you've opened the door, you're in trouble because you've opened up a big conversation. They trust you as their provider. And afterwards, of course, you've got to have something to offer. And I've seen this kind of fall apart where somebody says, well, I'm really good at motivational interviewing and I'm really good at opening the door. And here's a pamphlet for you to read about weight management, or here's a referral to nutrition. And that's it, I'm done. Boy, have I done a good job. That is not the right way to go about it. So you have to offer a little bit more than that. So next slide, please. So after attending this session, you should be able to list and describe a minimum of 3 principles when you set goals with your patients. Secondly, provide a minimum of 3 practical goals. We'll talk about the goals that Jim and I use in our Fit or Me program a little bit later. And using a fictional scenario, negotiate a set of goals with the patient. The fictional scenario I'm going to provide you and I'm going to ask your thoughts on are poor examples of how to set goals, and I want you to try to correct them. Next slide, please. So goal setting theory has a fairly long history. The 2 really big wigs in this area are Locke and Latham from the University of Maryland and the University of Toronto. Obviously, a goal is the object or aim of an action. It's not the actual action itself, it's where you want to go. Next slide. So the highest level of effort in goals occurs when the task is moderately difficult. And that's probably the most important principle to keep in mind. Setting a goal that's too easy, of course, doesn't get you anywhere. You know, it's like a patient who wants to lose 2 pounds or 10 pounds, or to get to a particular weight, and they're only 2 pounds away from that. Well, that's not especially challenging. And if it's extremely difficult, of course, it can be very frustrating, and patients tend to realize it's not realistic. So lowest levels occur when the task is either very easy or very hard. Specific difficult goals lead to higher performance than urging people to do their best. That doesn't work. Because over and over again, across a wide range of health behaviors, not just weight management, whether it's smoking cessation, exercise, relaxation, mental health, sleep, if you tell people do your best to get to bed on time, it doesn't work. It has to be much more specific and much more targeted than all of that. Next slide. So why does goal setting work? How does it work? These are some of the principles I want to outline. First of all, it's a directive function. And those of you who remember being in school know that evaluation, exams tend to drive performance. Well, the goal is to get a really high score on this particular test. Well, that directs all your efforts to specific tasks that are related to the test, for example. If the goal is to make sure you have breakfast every morning, you will direct your energy towards that particular goal. If the goal is nebulous, you will not. It has an energizing function. People feel energized when they have a specific goal that they have to try to meet, rather than do your best, try to eat healthier, try to lose weight. That doesn't work very well at all. Perhaps these are the 2 principles I think people don't realize. One is persistence. So we will have in our program, let's say somebody who has a goal of losing 50 pounds, which is a very ambitious goal, of course. And they come back and they want to lose this in, let's say, a year, which is reasonable. But after a year, they've only lost 14 pounds. Well, they recall that the original goal was to lose 50. So they will persist in some sort of effort thereafter for a prolonged period of time. And as long as you're making an effort, you're more likely to get to a goal that's meaningful. And so forth. So in that sense, it focuses your energy over a long period of time. And here's the most important thing. People tend to be very ingenious, very creative in trying to meet their goals, and will uncover skills and task-specific knowledge that's necessary to do so. If we tell people, do not eat anything or drink anything except for water after 7 p.m. And there's lots of reasons for that, which we won't get into. But essentially, people say, well, I've got to be creative about it. I sometimes finish work quite late at 6, and maybe I'll have to bring something with me at work so I can wrap up by 7 p.m. They start to develop their own skills around it. So that's one of the most important principles of goal setting. So these are the 4 mechanisms through which Locke and Latham have identified that goal setting actually creates behavior change. Next slide. Moderators are important. So what determines the extent to which you are able to meet your goals or move towards your goals? One is commitment, is probably the most important thing, as you can imagine. Commitment, most of the time in weight management or anything else, smoking cessation, taking your medications, diabetes management, we ask patients, how important is this goal to you? And secondly, how confident you are in achieving this goal, which collectively can be seen as a measure of commitment to the goal itself. Now, here's another important thing that comes up a lot. Shared decision-making, participatory decision-making is very, very important. But what's been shown over and over again is that you can assign a goal to someone, and as long as you provide a detailed explanation for how it works and why it's important, it's as effective as a participatory goal where somebody sets their own goal or picks from a list of options about goals that they want to select. So our initial approach in our program is an assigned set of goals because we want everyone to adopt a uniform set of behaviors, but we do provide detailed explanations. Actually, a couple times I provide an explanation, Jim provides an explanation, and the explanation is reinforced over and over again so that they understand it very well. So it doesn't really make a difference. So you think, oh, I'm assigning goals and that's not being very participatory, it's not engaging the patient. It is, if you explain why those goals are important and you encourage the patient to ask questions. Monetary incentives, I've been down this road since the year 2002. I think I shared a study we did with children. All my work in monetary incentives is with kids and adolescents. Yes, if you provide an incentive, people are able to better meet their goals. Some people for whom the monetary incentive is important. The problem is what happens when you take the monetary incentive away. And that's what George Lowenstein and other behavioral economists are concerned about, that people's adherence to goals tends to tail off. Next slide. So here are some interesting observations. Those who set the most ambitious goals, whether or not they meet them, are likely to be dissatisfied with their performance. That's normal. Jim and I face this all the time. You've lost 20 pounds. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah, it's all right. I was hoping for 30. It's like, well, that's amazing. You set a goal of 30 and you lost 20. That's amazing. That is an actually completely normal phenomenon. So you can expect that with your patients. Now, the populations we deal with, we'd be satisfied if they actually even did anything, but there are nevertheless a small proportion of people. People think that goals are a lot about personality. Of course, they're about personality. The personality part comes into the commitment, the self-efficacy part of goal setting. And that's what Locke and Latham have written about. However, they make it clear that if you explain goals, if you adopt SMART goals, which we're going to talk about, you can overcome any sort of personality. So personality is not as big a modifier as you might expect. So I didn't list it among the modifiers. I told you that certain things are modifiers, commitment being one of them, which is a function of personality. But personality itself, whether someone is gregarious, engaging, outgoing, social, quiet, it doesn't seem to make a huge difference to the process of goal setting. Next slide. So here's the SMART framework. I know everyone has seen some version of this in some health context or even other contexts, in business, for example, which I think is where this comes from. But goals should be specific, measurable, attainable or actionable. This is probably the most important one. Relevant, which we'll talk about, and time-based. It can't be a nebulous sort of thing. I'm going to start sometime soon to become, to become more active physically. Well, that doesn't really tell me very much at all. So let's move on. So these are examples of goals that are not appropriate. And let's see what you guys think. So specificity, I'm going to do more walking after work. So my question to you is, how might you change that to be a little bit more specific? Let's see if we can get some participation. Rick, can you scroll over the screen? It looks like it's mostly up there, us there. So yeah, there we go. Oh, okay. Wow, everybody's kind of muted. So how about Kathleen Woods? If you can give us a view.
Middle.
There we go. Kathleen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. How might you change that to be a more specific goal?
I would probably ask what time you might walk and how long you're going to walk and where you're going to walk. Those
Good.
kind of questions.
Yeah, well, questions or and ask the patient and actually make sure you have you emerge with a specific goal. So, I'm going to walk for 30 minutes after work in the woods behind my office or on the trail behind my office every single day. So frequency, the duration, the time frame, the location, you've got all of those there. So measurable, I want to lose enough weight to feel more energetic by Christmas. Now, I don't recommend specific amounts of weight loss, but why is that a poor type of goal and how might you change it? So maybe we could have Sunny. Do you have a Sunny's on there?
There we go. Is it unmuted? Okay.
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
I would probably want to say, like, let's pick a time like where you're making a goal that you're working towards. Like if you want to say from now for 3 months, we're going to look at like towards weight loss. You don't have to have a set amount, but like we can see how much you lose, but have a time where you're going to be measuring and like moving towards.
Yeah, so as long as it's something that's measurable, now you're overlapping with the time-based goal. So that's not a good goal. I want to lose enough weight. But really, what is it that you want to accomplish by Christmas time? Is it a specific amount of weight? Is it a specific behavior? Is it a specific self-monitoring of weight that you want? But it has to be something that I can actually get some numbers from. And this goal, as it's formulated, does not do that. Okay, good. So I want to spend a little time on this one: attainable, achievable, actionable, whatever you call it. The A can stand for different things. I'm aiming to be 120 pounds by next summer. This is a realistic sort of thing. And Gary Foster, who is now used to be at Temple and someone I know pretty well. He's now I think the medical director or the scientific director for Weight Watchers, the company. And he has done a lot of research on this going back about 20 years. When you ask people that have a high degree of obesity, let's say they're 300 pounds, this applies to men, women, people of different age, sex, race, ethnicities, etc. You ask them, well, what would be a great weight for you? They often say something like, I'd like to be 120 pounds. And then Gary has asked them, well, what if you didn't get there? What if you got to 130? And they would often report they would be absolutely devastated if they went from 300 pounds to 130 instead of 120, okay? So that is not an attainable goal. So people often have these unrealistic expectations. So it has to be something realistic. And the realistic rate of weight loss, we always say, is about 1 pound a week. And that's usually when we have people coming back to see us in a month or two and they've lost 7 or 8 pounds, that's wonderful. When I was the director of the Pediatrics Center, the goal was to flatten their BMI percentile curve so they stopped gaining weight. That was an achievement, believe it or not, for most of those kids because they come to us gaining weight continuously and we flatten it. That's a realistic expectation. So it has to be something based on your scientific knowledge as a provider that you can say is a realistic amount. The other thing we often advocate is people go on these radical diets, of course, and they fail. As you know, 95% of people regain the weight. So they go from eating very unhealthily to going on a protein and water diet or something ridiculous of that nature, okay? It doesn't work because it doesn't follow incremental behavior change. So incremental behavior change, of course, has been promoted a lot by the National Institutes of Health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as small changes, moving, nudge, you know, there's a book called Nudge, for example. Cass Sunstein and others are involved in that. When you move incrementally towards a behavior, you can adopt new habits over time. And that's what we recommend. So it can't be something like, I'm going to stop eating bread, which you hear a lot of. Okay, you can try to stop eating bread, but if you've eaten a lot of bread up until that point, that's going to be awfully hard. How about you stop eating bread for lunch a couple days a week? Not that that's a great goal, but that would be an incremental sort of approach to it. Let's talk about relevance for a moment here. Going to start encouraging my husband to join me in the gym. All right, that's not a good goal. So Penny, how might you make this a bit more relevant? Penny Mullins.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Penny, go
Okay,
ahead.
so then I would say that I'm going to go to the gym, whether or not my husband goes with me.
Yeah, so that's relevance. Now, obviously, Penny would add more specificity, measurability around that, et cetera. It's not relevant. Whether your husband is encouraged to go to the gym or not, and I'm assuming he also needs to get the healthy weight, it doesn't really, you know, he's not my patient. He's not here. I don't know what his goals are. Maybe he's a gym rat for all I know. It doesn't help me that that's the goal that you're trying to reach. Time-based, of course, and I think we've already addressed this. Sunny was talking about this too. It's not helpful if somebody says, you know, and we deal with this in primary care and smoking cessation all the time. You say, are you contemplative, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, I'm going to start cutting down in the new year as soon as 2020 starts. Well, that doesn't really help me very much. When are you going to start cutting down? How much are you going to start cutting down? And why are you waiting so long to do that? Why are you waiting 2+ months to do that? So it has to be time-based. I really need you to start having breakfast every morning beginning tomorrow morning is probably the best way to think about it. Okay, so that's a smart framework. It's a useful framework for formulating goals. So it gives us a lot of information, I think. We've already talked about some goal setting principles as well. You can set easy goals within the SMART framework or ones that are way too difficult, but it has to be something that's realistic. Next slide. So our starting point goals in the Fit Me program are the following. First of all, to eat a rich breakfast. Now, the literature is off again and on again, but the preponderance of evidence, so preponderance of evidence is very different than evidence from a single study, for example, points to the fact that those who eat a rich breakfast, meaning we recommend whatever you like, as much as you like, are less likely to eat later on in the day, feel more energetic, and it's associated with a healthier weight. Nothing but water to drink. We are the only mammals, I believe, that in their natural state drink caloric beverages. And until the year 1900, there was virtually no sweet beverage available. Sassafras, succotash, something like that. But that was like a very, very rare sort of thing. It was a therapeutic thing. Nothing to eat or drink after 7 p.m., which works in many ways. Many of our patients, our clients who are trying to lose weight, eat very late at night and eat large quantities. So that limits that behavior. Also, of course, your glycogen stores are depleted after 6 to 8 hours. So at least in theory, around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, you're starting to burn fat, which is the goal. 30 minutes of continuous physical activity per day. I served on the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics /AMA's Pediatric and Adolescent Obesity Committee Guideline Committee in 2008. They all adopted the 60-minute rule. I voted against it, but was voted down. That was me and a couple of other people. The reason I voted against 60 minutes, which is in the guideline, is because I felt if you tell a kid or an adolescent to exercise for 60 minutes and they're doing 0, they're going to still do 0. And the 30 minutes was more realistic. The counter argument was, hey, 60 minutes is what's been shown to improve health. And that's more of a scientific argument. So what we start with is 30 minutes of continuous physical activity per day. These are patients with obesity. Yes, there's no question you can accumulate 30 to 60 minutes a day, and you'll see commercials on TV that recommend that for people that are already pretty healthy. Hey, I'm taking the stairs, that's 1 minute. If taking the stairs again, that's 2 minutes. I walk to the car in the parking lot. But for our folks to have the experience of physical activity, what it means to be physically active, I think they have to have a regular goal that is beyond what they're doing now. So the thing I hate to hear about from patients the most is, I'm on my feet all day, so I don't need to exercise. Are you really on your feet all day? Are you leaning against something when you're doing it? It's really not physical activity. That's why we actually push people a little bit in this direction. So it is somewhat moderately difficult for folks. Next slide. So we're going to stop here right now. Let's give you about 2 minutes to see if there's any questions or comments, and then we will go on to our case studies. Hopefully we'll try to make those as interactive as possible. Go ahead, Mike.
What do you say to patients who are wanting to do intermittent fasting or maybe time restricted eating and skip breakfast, and then stop eating at 8 p.m.?
Yeah, so we had this discussion. This came up as a question. I'm going to say this: intermittent fasting is an effective weight loss strategy. Okay, consistently been shown to do it. However, it is no better than an approach in which you are limiting your, the way it works is caloric restriction, basically. So limiting your caloric restriction over time has the same impact as it does there. So now, the intermittent fast should be roughly 10 to 12 hours at a minimum. So if you cut yourself off at 7 o'clock, and most people will start having breakfast again around 7 o'clock. So essentially it is an intermittent fast. So it's no different from that. I don't recommend breakfast skipping under any circumstances. If you're going to skip something, skip dinner. Okay, that would be a better meal to skip. But breakfast skipping is not recommended. Any other questions? Oh, Sherry, there was a couple questions here. For first question, let me try to get to the top here. So how long do you think you can exercise after?
I think that was a comment from the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So what do you mean by rich breakfast? We use the term rich breakfast, and I don't know, I'm not the origins of that term. It's been around for a long time. And it comes from Wadden and Stunkard and those folks. And what it essentially means, first of all, is rich in energy, also called an energy-rich breakfast. The reason I don't like to use energy-rich is that's kind of harder to interpret as well from patients. But what we recommend is enjoying breakfast. Make breakfast, hopefully, at some point, the biggest meal of the day. So it's what you like to enjoy for breakfast without too much concern for the amounts or even the types of foods. And it sounds ironic to say that. And I was wondering, why would you recommend something like that? And what Wadden, Stunkard, and Walter Willett all recommend is, if you take all pleasure away from the weight loss journey, people inevitably fail. The strange things that our patients have been having for breakfast in attempts to lose weight, protein shakes only, virtually nothing, a couple of rice cakes, whatever it happens to be. And you ask them, do you really like that? He goes, no, I hate it. He goes, well, then if you don't enjoy anything about your eating pattern, you're going to fail consistently. So that's why we say a rich breakfast. Next slide, next question. How do you work with people who are working night shift and not eating after 7 p.m.? Actually, Jim, do you want to maybe address that? Because you've dealt with that issue a lot.
People who they're working the night shift, and which one are you looking at there?
What about people who are working the night shift and not eating after 7 p.m.? How do you shift the time?
Yeah, so what we often do is determine if people would like to shift their eating schedule so that they would then have breakfast before they go to work, have their breakfast meal before they go to work. And if they want to have their fasting period when they're not eating, then after they finish work and when they go to bed, and perhaps early in the morning. And some people do want to shift that in that direction, and it seems to work pretty well. And it helps people, I think, sleep better as well, because they're not going to bed on a full stomach, because they're having their biggest meal of the day at breakfast, which is before they start their work day. And For us, I think most of the people that work the night shift have adopted that routine and it's worked pretty well for them.
Yeah, and for just to add to what Jim said, we write all of this stuff down for our patients. The goals are given to them as a specific sheet with individualization. I'm going to try to get through these very quickly. So I think it's Arjun who has a case. So what about people who say that they are hungry and just not feel like eating in the morning? We hear this all a lot. And the reason they're not hungry in the morning is because they're eating late at night for the most part, right? And so we want to adjust their time frame of eating. People who do that, do follow our initial rules, wake up hungry in the morning and have breakfast for the most part. I mean, if they're really doing it. What techniques do you use to encourage patients who work on their feet all day for 8 to 12 hours to exercise when they get home? Okay, there are some occupations in which people are genuinely on their feet all day. Letter carriers, I think, are probably, they're not on, it's not 8 to 12 hours, but it's at least several hours a day. I'm not convinced that the rest of the folks are really, truly on their feet all day. Although standing is a low intensity physical activity that's associated with a decrease in cardiovascular risk. I do not recommend those people try to exercise once they get home because they're not going to do it. So it's got to be before work. And it does not have to be intense. It just has to be walking. For patients, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just add one quick thing to that. One thing that seems to work pretty well for patients to understand where they're at with their physical activity is to just simply explain, okay, you're at the weight you're at currently, given that level of physical activity. So we're going to need to go beyond that a bit to help stimulate weight loss. So then they kind of go, okay, I see what you're saying. I feel like I'm getting a lot of physical activity. Whether they are or they are not, as Dr. Rao said, is a debatable thing. But then they understand that, okay, I need to exceed that if I want to then stimulate weight loss.
So that's a good point. I mean, I would not judge them and say, yeah, you're really not on your feet all day. So you don't want to say that. But as Jim said, look, okay, you're on your feet all day, but it's obviously not working because you're here. So we need to increase our physical activity. More so than that. For patients with diabetes, usually recommended that patients take a snack with insulin before bedtime. Do you still recommend that for patients? Yes, I do. There are specialized circumstances, of course, and we have a whole series on diabetes coming up. So the non-insulin dependent diabetes is kind of our base case. Thought exercise has been not shown, exercise is not very effective for weight loss, no doubt about it. The exercise we are recommending is to prevent weight regain and for weight maintenance. So it would be very disappointing as people's metabolism slows as they eat less if they start to still gain weight and get frustrated. So the exercise does prevent that. An energy deficit, the energy deficit from standing is not sufficient. That's a great point that Chris Taylor has made. So, you think about the CDC's classification of physical activity. Moderate to vigorous intensity does not encompass standing. Standing is not going to burn a lot of calories. You ever see people who get on a treadmill or an exercise bike and they say they burnt 300 calories because that's what it shows. That's not 300 calories because if you just sat on the bike, you would burn a certain amount. So it's above, it encompasses both of those measures within it. So it's not quite as much as you think. Per se. So if you're on your feet all day, yes, you're burning calories, but it's a very, very small amount. One cookie can, something about one cookie can undo an hour of exercise. For our folks, I agree with, is it Akram? It's probably, some of these cookies are 300 calories. And I was on a treadmill this morning and it read like 420 and I was going very fast. So I don't think a lot of these folks are burning a cookie. Anyway, so these are some great suggestions, Kriti, from Fremont. I asked everyone to quantify the number of steps and work towards increase. There's a great goal. So pedometers are a really great goal, a goal of reaching 10,000 steps or so. Some of our patients who are really successful monitor their physical activity in great detail. We at least have objective measures of physical activity now. We do not have measures of energy intake, unfortunately. So that's a great suggestion as well. And it enrolls adolescents who have obesity for bariatric surgery, and it does work, by the way. But they wanted a bunch of adolescents with BMIs over 50 who were interested. We could not find them. The only ones we found had serious psychiatric problems and behavioral problems. And some of them even had fundamental genetic syndromes associated with obesity. So when you see someone over 500 pounds, that's fundamentally something different than everyone else. So the fact that he's lost 60 pounds is fabulous and fantastic. I will also say that as you guide him towards weight management, whatever you do, you can set goals, etc. Just treat him with respect, which just judging from the way Penny speaks, and obviously we don't know each other, but I think that you are doing. Say, hey, come on in, let's talk. I'm just going to treat you with respect. Let's talk about weight, let's talk about health, let's talk about what you like to do in your spare time. Because sometimes these people wind up being defined by obesity. We see this with adolescents a lot. They're so obese that people say, oh yes, even in school, you can imagine how cruel kids can be. Oh yeah, that's that really big guy, or that's the really big girl. And that's how they're defined, but there's so much more to most of them than that. So I don't know what this guy is, what his hobbies are, etc. I don't have a good feel for him, but just treat him with respect and say, hey, I'm glad you're thinking about surgery. We're getting close to where we are. And then try to identify someone who will also do the same. A lot of surgeons are reluctant to operate on people this size because the rate of complications is so much higher. So, but there are some great people at the clinic and here at UH who would be willing to work with you on that as well. So that having been said, maybe we can start with Chris and see what your comments would be about how to, just in general, how to help this guy at this point.
Yeah, I do like the fact that there's like the exercise bands and things like that of ways to be able to get that activity going without a lot of load bearing. I think that becomes one of those, first you have to strengthen the muscles for that mobility to happen. Even to the extent of like chair aerobics that we see more for in aging situations, long-term care, to keep that flexibility with that amount of weight and increasing mobility. But the limited resource aspect, I think there's the opportunity, especially for an individual who's not working at home. Do we know about his meal preparation skills or motivation? Because it sounds like that the changes he's made have been positive and have also been things that have required some time investment. Chicken takes a lot more time to prepare than ramen noodles do. So the ability to start looking at what those options are, if he's preparing meals for himself, being able to prepare those meals and enough extras. They taught me in meal management, there's no such thing as leftovers, there's planned overs. So that you can prepare, if you're by yourself, to be able to prepare and have additionals behind so that you can now invest that money. You're not wasting food to be able to carry that forward. And with his online presence, I'm also kind of curious about maybe, and the stigma, the online social networking groups that might afford some of that support, where he doesn't have to come in, he doesn't have to be seen, but he has people that he could dialogue with, and to be able to use that type of venue to be able to get access to a support network that would help him kind of keep this motivation going. Because it seems like he's done really well with the weight loss. Now it's a matter of how do you sustain that, especially within his means and his mobility.
Great thoughts, Chris. Kriti has some suggestions focusing on physical activity. Penny, if you could comment, has he tried aquatic physical therapy for his knee and hip pain, which would be...
I did talk to him about having physical therapy in his home, if that would make him more comfortable. He was very self-conscious about that, did not want to do that. I talked to him about aquatic therapy, of course, might be more comfortable and it might be enjoyable. And he absolutely declined that. He was really uncomfortable with exposing his body that way.
Yeah. So my thoughts with him, again, treating him with respect, partnering with a bariatric surgeon who understands the patient reasonably well and while working on his goals. I can't believe that there is not some serious trauma, psychiatric or psychological trauma from both of his parents dying when he was young. And I don't know what his upbringing was like. So he's a unique patient, and I think you should be congratulated for working with him, because it's going to be a tough haul, but hopefully he'll do okay. So I just want to see if Jim had any additional comments, and we'll go to questions afterwards.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Dr. Rao just said. You know, he may be a patient who scores high on the ACEs scale of adverse childhood experiences that then predispose him or put him at risk for the kinds of behaviors and eating behaviors that he's exhibited. So that, you know, can provide a little bit of insight, and the provider probably knows more about that background. I think it's really smart to do what you've done in assessing his depression again and readjusting his medications recently, because if a patient is depressed, it's going to be very difficult to be effective in weight loss activities and in goal setting and achieving goals, because depression will inevitably undermine that. So that's great that you're doing that. No, I think his progress is remarkable, and one of the things that you can say to him is simply that you've lost more than 10% of your body weight. So we know that you've already improved your health significantly. And that is a very significant accomplishment, and then, you've elicited the motivation from him. And I would suggest eliciting, what do you want for your life moving forward? Now that you've made this progress, to sort of help him see that he's on a very positive trajectory, potentially. He's lost weight. He could then get the bariatric surgery if he wants to go in that direction. He can get his joint replacement surgeries potentially. And in time, he could really transform his life into a much better quality of life. And this, I'm just speculating, but this may be what is behind his motivation. And I just encourage you to elicit that and help him, amplify that and help him bring that about in his life. So just a few comments. I think, he's on a good path, a much better path than he has been for quite some time.
So a couple of questions, and I had a question for Penny first. What is his level of education?
He has a high school education. He does like the computer. He, is a gamer socially, and he looks up things. He looks up, ways to make his chicken, things like that. In terms of motivation, I think he's very motivated at this point, worried about being independent. Like I said, he's very ashamed that he requires these assistive devices and this help from family members. He, I think, is worried about, when his aunt is not available, how limited he's going to be. So he does express that, he wants to be able to take care of himself and not rely on other people so much.
And he's never been employed?
I think he's had some jobs years ago. He has not been employed during the last few years since I've known him.
So I just want to wrap up. Sherry has a couple of questions. Would you consider medication for him? I would not. Here's why. So first of all, one of the suggestions was a liraglutide, Saxenda, Victoza. It's a GLP-1 agonist. It's not going to be covered by Medicaid, for number one. Topiramate, Topamax, has been shown to aid in weight loss. So if he took it every day for 3 months at a reasonably high dose, he may lose between 5 and 8 pounds. The problem with putting a guy like this on medication is not that it would not be effective in assisting him with weight loss. It's just that the weight loss would be so trivial, and the expectations from the patient are often so high. Gosh, this is going to help me a little bit, that he may actually wind up being disappointed. So this is not somebody that I would put on medication. Even if he was on liraglutide at the top dose, he may get a significant degree of weight loss, but it's probably all, it's not going to be any greater than what he can achieve by some fundamental changes, like cutting himself off at 7 o'clock or having breakfast or moving a little bit more, which is what Dr. Aurora suggested. Something like that would probably be more feasible for him. And you're going to run into insurance problems with any other designated weight loss medication. So I wouldn't consider it at this point. Okay, one couple of minutes for a final comment, and then we'll turn it over to Shannon. Boy, we are out of time again. Shannon?
Okay. All right, thanks. We have been sending reminders to complete your demographic contact information in REDCap. You'll continue receiving reminders until you do the survey. So we are going to use that as part of our leadership team and an internal program evaluation, and we will also share that information with the cohort. If you don't wish to share your information with the cohort, you may opt out. Please let me know by October 31st. Next, we are excited to announce that registration is open for our spring 2020 TeleECHO clinic, which is reducing the burden of hypertension. It's a 12-week series running from January 16th through April 2nd. And you can register on our website. And finally, please complete the post-clinic survey that was emailed to you this morning. And that's all I have.
Great.
Next week, we have the National Academy of Medicine competencies for weight management on October 31st. And I will give bonus points to anyone who wears a costume for Halloween.
All right. Thanks,
then.
everyone.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Good.